Welcome back to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and yours virtually.
We're coming to you from gardenatz.org. I'm Stephen Nicola.
I'm Janet McConovich, and we're talking about measuring for garden design. There is a note-taking guide. I'm sorry that I forgot again to get it put up until late, but it's there now, and it's got a lot of detail because this is a detail-oriented topic, and I hope that it will stick with us.
Yeah.
We're talking about making a scale drawing, which means a plan view, a map of a garden or a property that gives you the relative sizes of gardens and distances between things and lets you predict what you can see from different places. And it especially lets you work without having to move something around physically.
Yeah.
On paper, you can move it around a lot more easily. So there are a lot of different scales that are in use. Anything works, but what's common is for your whole property, they might have 1 inch on the paper might equal 20 feet or 10 feet or 8 feet. When I'm drawing a detailed garden, I like to do 1 inch is 4 feet to have room to actually put how many plants go in where. But that's not going to matter so much. We'll set that scale a little bit later, as long as you know that they're all okay. This is a small house, and I'm able to fit the house, the patio, and the gardens that we had to do onto one legal size, so kind of an oversized piece of paper. So I found I could do 1 inch equals 8 feet. We'll get to deciding that and how you figure that out in a little bit. At a different house, we did just the backyard, 1 to 8, so that we could, as I said, predict how many of each kind of plant we were going to need to put in. And how much detail goes into a scale drawing, that's entirely up to you. It's your choice whether you want to put each plant in and make little different symbols for each plant, play around with the symbols, with cut edges being your coarser plants like hostas, and the smoother edge plants being things like mums and coreopsis and that kind of thing. Or whether you just want to draw little outlines and say, well, this in this area I'll put, and I'll fit about 8 of these, and I'll fit 9 of those. But it lets you do that without having to figure it out yourself afterwards, because putting the pots out there doesn't always work. You can't quite visualize how big things are going to get. Who needs it? Maybe not many of us do, but it's nice to have them sometimes, because if you're working with a contractor, having a scale drawing that says, here's how many that I want, and here's where I want them, here's how much walkway I need, here's the way that I want it laid out, that's an important thing to have. If you're trying to keep track of a collection of plants, it can be a good thing to do.
It could be really important.
If you're on a garden walk, if you're hosting a tour, people just love to have a map that they can have that says which plants are blooming right now or what the name of those major plants are, so that you don't have to answer it 200 times during the day.
Yeah. And gardeners looking for help, you could have a design there and show them, and then show them the plants they could relate.
You're right, it makes a lot more difference. So in Sue's backyard, we put in two arbors, a bench, and a trellis. And the contractors put in the 2 arbors, and we wanted those arbors to go where we wanted them to go. So a scale drawing that said this far from the garage, angled this way. It's important to us that this trellis was not flat against the wall, but angled toward the bench, and that the bench was angled this way, not straight looking at the wall. So for contractors, it's good to have. For somebody trying to keep track of what's out there, these are 2 engineers at this house, and they want to know what those plants are. They're
precisely.
And they want to be able to have something that they can precisely place. Where did I put those new ones that I got, and what was the name of that thing? Or if your garden's on tour, you can hand somebody a map, and you can say, that's over in bed I, or that's number 2. Or you can say those main plants there, that's the weeping katsura in that area. That's the concolor fir in that area. You can tell them your major plants that way, what you want to point out to them. Or in that same garden, keeping track of all of the different conifers that you have out there, just so that you remember where they are. So those are reasons to have a scale drawing, that you can put in the main plants exact, and then put everything else in reference to them. It also, like Steve says, to get help, if you are asking somebody to help you with something, maybe you're asking your kids to come over and help, or your neighbor to come and help, having a drawing that says, I know what I'm doing, I know where things are gonna go, I just need help to finish this finite thing right here. It helps, because the
It-
skeptics are always figuring that if
It's-
they agree to help us, they're gonna be stuck
It's gonna
forever.
be like helping somebody move who doesn't pre-pack.
Yes, right, yes.
Okay.
We have helped friends move who didn't realize that you should pack things ahead of time. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, you might need it for any of those reasons. Skeptics, the garden that, take your sip right now, this is that garden in Boston.
it's the original
I
design.
had to do more design work on that one beyond figuring where the plants went, because the historical society, who I call the hysterical society, had to know everything. They had to know exactly what was going on in that place ahead of time. And if not for a scale drawing that said, here's where we're going to change the
Yeah.
pavement, here's where we're going to put plants in, etc.
Oh,
See, we're coming off of a cold that we caught this
Yeah.
week. Okay, to make the scale drawing, you're gonna need graph paper and pencil. And that graph paper can be, I like to use 4 squares to the inch, which is what you're looking at on the page right here. It lets me do my math most easily, and we'll get into that math a
Yeah.
little bit later. There's a lot of 5 or 10 square graph paper, and that's quite usable too. Just whatever you really feel like using, whatever you happen to have. And either the letter size, I generally use the letter size when I'm outside. Sometimes I then decide, like in the case of the 2 engineers, I will buy oversized ledger size paper, which is twice
Yeah.
letter size. Because I want something letter size that I can put on a clipboard and use, because I'm walking around making notes on it after the design is done. I'm making notes as to what needs to be moved or what needs to be added. The journal or ledger size you can fold in half and put onto a clipboard.
And you also have to remember pencils work in almost all weather.
Right, you can write in the cold with a pencil. You can't write in the cold with a pen, and even on wet paper, as long as it's not pouring down rain, the pencil still works. And you're going to need a long tape measure unless you've got a very small property or you're working on just one garden. These cost less than $20, and I know that because
We
many
have bought many of them.
we've bought many of them, because Janet tends to forget them. So some of you out
Or-
there may have one of
Or
these
there
already.
may be people, oh, this is well, I've got an extra here. Why don't you have? Yeah, we've done that too.
Yeah. I do find that the ones that have it's called the power retractor, they take less winding to wind them back up again, and those cost a little more than $20.
But
But
when
at any
the
rate,
spring breaks,
get one that's got 100 feet, or if you've got a really big property, go ahead and get a 200-foot one. Better to have 2 tapes, and you'll see that a little bit later. If you have only 1 tape, you can get by with 1 tape. You're just going to need a few short stakes as well, and we'll get into that later.
yeah,
And you're going to need a skewer, or a narrow stake, or I use an old long screwdriver to
Yep,
put
just-
through that tab at the end and anchor it into the soil, so that
At
you
your
can
spot.
walk and pull the tape out
Yep.
behind you.
and anchor it deep, because if you just put it in a little ways, you pull that tape and it'll pop out. And then
Yeah,
you gotta
and
go
then
back and do it again. And then,
Steve doesn't like doing the tape.
no, I do not.
So why is that there?
Huh?
Oh, okay, so if I hold the end securely at the far end, at one end, I can walk along and just pull it straight out behind me. Not only are they good for measuring, but they're good for what people tell us. They say in some books and on many garden shows, I've said, they say take a garden hose and lay it out to imagine the edge of your garden. Garden hoses don't cooperate that way. But
Garden
tape
hose-
measures show up because they're of their color, and they're much more flexible, so you can use them.
And garden hoses don't tell you how far everything is. You still have to measure it.
Right. A compass is optional, but you should have some idea of north, south, east, or west, or something you're gonna need a reference point. So if
Yeah.
you don't have a reference point, then you might need a compass to figure out which way you're facing. It's nice that the phones have a compass now, so you can figure that out. And it helps to have a carpenter's tape, a rigid tape measure too, either 15 feet or 25 feet, because there are many times when for the second measure, we're going to talk about 2 coordinates in a while. For the second measure, you can stand and just stretch out the carpenter's rigid tape.